Welcome to Lea560 Managing Diverse Teams Lecture number 5, Crucial Conversations. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about conflict resolution amongst teams, and particularly, you've got a conflict, you've got a situation. How do you handle that? Is there something that you can do to try to minimize the damage, or at least to try to bring people back together again? That's what we're going to be talking about in this particular lecture. So let's start with the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, and you can see this. The two gentlemen to your right, that's the two gentlemen that actually developed this particular mode or model. But you'll notice to your left there is an assertiveness. This is on the vertical axis. It measures your assertiveness, and on the horizontal axis on the bottom, it measures your cooperativeness. And so you will notice the different stations that are there. If, for instance, you are in a situation where you would register all the way up to the upper left, this would be highly assertive and uncooperative. This is a situation where you're competing basically with one another. If you are clear to the other end, where you're at the lower right quadrant, this is the accommodating mode. This is where you're very cooperative, but you're very unassertive. People are just saying, hey, will you do this? You don't really want to do that, but you go ahead and do this for whatever the reason is, and you find yourself very accommodating in that instance. If you go all the way over to your lower left quadrant, this is unassertive and uncooperative. This is a person that's just avoiding the whole thing. They're not gonna deal with it. You might be in a meeting where you're trying to discuss this and work this thing out. They want to avoid it, and so they either just check out, and just sit there, or sometimes they actually just leave the room. Well, this is an avoiding behavior. Well, when you get then to the very center, you'll see this is the compromising behavior. This is where, I'm going to give a little and you give a little, and we'll each get, a little bit, and we'll live with it. It's not perfect, but at least we got something. We compromised, and that's fine. But the problem is it's not the best. The best you see in the upper right-hand quadrant, and this is collaborating. This is when you're assertive and you're saying, I want this, and yet you're cooperative, where you're willing to listen to the other side. Let's look at another graph that shows this. So here now we see this graph again, and you see the assertiveness, or this is what I want, and the cooperativeness, this is what you want, and there we have it. And you can see where the upper left-hand quadrant for competing is really a win-lose. I'm going to win, but for me to win means you have to lose. All the way down to the bottom of that is avoiding, which everybody loses. You can't resolve anything, you can't deal with anything, because nobody's willing to actually talk this thing through, and so there you are. You have then all the way over to your right an accommodating, which is a lose-win. I'm not going to get anything that I want, but you're going to win because I'm going to just give in and do whatever you want me to do, and for whatever reason that is. In the middle, you'll see this. There's a lose-win, compromising. It's 50-50. You're not really winning. You're not really losing. You're just kind of getting what you can. But the collaborating, this is where that you are assertive, not aggressive, but you're assertive. This is my belief. I'm standing up for my beliefs. I'm standing up for my position that I have, and yet I am also willing to cooperate and listen to your side, and the two together end up coming up with maybe a third way, a better way, and they collaborate and they come to an agreement that they both feel like is a win. That is the Thomas Kilmann model of conflict resolution. Now, when we talk about having a crucial conversation, well, there are some that would suggest that, a crucial conversation deals with presidents, kings, presidents of companies, or high stakes players. But the reality is, a crucial conversation can be where opinions vary. And as these opinions vary, I think that it's this. I think that I'm ready to do this. You don't think that I'm ready to do this. And this is a crucial conversation that has to do with my future or where we are. Or the stakes are really high. We have to get this resolved, because if we can't get this resolved, we may not make our deadline, or we might find ourselves in a lawsuit, or when emotions are running really strong. And it's at those times, when people are, they're stressed, and everyone's very sensitive, and a lot of times people aren't really listening. This is a crucial conversation to bring this down and to somehow be able to deal with this. So this is a crucial conversation. Now, let me say this. So if we're going to negotiate this out, and we're going to be able to resolve conflict, to keep the team and the synergy happening, here's the first thing, and probably the most important thing that we need to deal with, and that is safety. Those who are most effective at managing conflict have learned communication skills that make it safe as possible for everyone involved to talk about honestly about the issues, I should say, especially when there are strong feelings involved. They minimize defensiveness, and they make it safe to talk about your feelings, to talk about how you really feel. They preserve relationships, which sometimes are a casualty of conflict. Look at this next slide. Now here, this is the crucial conversations model. And what I want you to see in this is that before you even begin in this conversation, you have to start with you first. So get unstuck. I mean, okay, this may have been the way that you always did it. This may be your perceived thoughts about what you think that it is. But somewhere along the line, you've got to get unstuck. You've got to start with your heart, and you've got to master your stories. Now, what is it exactly that has happened here? What's going on? But the biggest thing that I want you to see is right in the center is the pool of shared meaning. There has to be enough safety that people can place within the pool of shared meaning their thoughts, their feelings, their position, without fear of reprisal, without fear that they're going to say something and it's just not there. So it's important. This is what we're trying to get to, is for people to get to this pool of shared meaning, because then at this place, this is where that you can actually collaborate. This is where there is an emergence of a new idea, a better understanding, where that synergy thrives right in this particular place. Okay, so once we know that it's safe, the first thing we need to do, and this will help in that, is active listening. Especially if you're having to listen to complaints from one employee about another, and how well you understand what you're told will probably affect how you respond and what, if anything, you decide to do next. So, some people, they'll just react defensively. Well, you're the one being unfair here. Or they'll debate. No, you're wrong. That's it. You're wrong. Sometimes people will blame the other person for misunderstanding them. You're just jumping to conclusions. Sometimes they'll make judgments. even privately, about what the person is saying. What a jerk. Um, and I could go on, but the point that I'm saying is that active listening is a process. In fact, it's a two-part process. First of all, hearing what the other is saying is part of that process. You need to really actively listen, try to really hear them. What are they actually saying? And number two, we have to demonstrate to her that she has been heard. So, active listening, for instance, can help you to understand the speaker's point of view, maybe their concerns that they have. It can de-escalate intense emotions. Somebody's very upset, and just knowing that you heard them sometimes will de-escalate those intense emotions. It conveys respect, the fact that you are worthy to be heard, and so I'm listening to you. It conveys safety. You know what? You're able to speak here. You're able to tell us, what you really think, and you're not going to be damaged or injured, or there's not going to be reprisal over this. It encourages honest sharing of the speaker's perspective. So there are 4 skills that effectively demonstrate active listening. Number 1 is attending behaviors. Sitting on the edge of your chair sometimes is one thing. Sitting up, not having your cell phone out, you're trying to talk and they're answering text, or they're writing at their desk, but they've actually... One of the things that I would do a lot of times when somebody needs to talk to me in my office, most of the time, unless it's an official meeting or something, most of the time I'll come from behind my desk and I'll sit down in a chair next to them, and we'll talk. And by doing that, it shows that I'm very interested in what they have to say. Paraphrasing what they said. Okay, so you're saying this, right? This is what we're saying. You're paraphrasing it. Sometimes summarizing it. So let me just summarize this. So this is what we covered. This is what you're telling me. And then sometimes reflecting feelings. Because sometimes the emotional content of what someone says is the most important detail in his or her story. So reflecting feelings requires that you listen for feelings expressed by a speaker and then identify them, whether they were expressed verbally or non-verbally. And you have to do it without expressing your judgment or opinions. So here, let me give you some examples of reflecting feelings. So you say to the person, it sounds like you're disappointed or hurt that she didn't return your call. Now that's expressing a feeling. Or so you're angry that she didn't get the information to you when you were expecting it. Do I have that right? Another one, it made you mad that the group decided without even asking you about it. Do I have that right? One last one. It sounds like you were really scared when he came into the office and he slammed the door. So when you do that sort of thing, you're reflective. You're showing a reflective motions. You're helping them to know, hey, I understand how you feel. I understand how this is going. Now, one thing that I would like to say as well, one little thing, then we'll go to the next slide. If you use a feeling word, it is better to overstate the intensity. In other words, saying furious rather than understate it by saying concerned. And here's the reason why. Let's say that you say to somebody, well, I can tell that you're concerned about this, and she's furious about it. She's going to tell you quickly that if that intensity she feels is less than you stated. I'm not just concerned, I am mad. I am upset. I mean, you're going to get that. So understating it will convey, if you've understated it, it'll just convey that, she's going to tell you, no, I'm or when you overstate it, she might say, well, no, I don't really, I'm not quite that mad, but I'm upset about it. It's better to overstate it than it is to understate it. Let me give you some. Another one that we're going to deal with is open-ended questions, and here's some examples that I have of what open-ended questions are. They're nice because what they do is they honestly give you an opportunity to let a person open up and let a person actually vent and articulate what they really feel. So some of the things that you would have, I've got a list on here, but just a few that I just throw out here. How do you see it? How do you see this thing? Or what did she say to you? And that gives them a chance to actually express this. Or how did that affect you? What were you hoping would happen when you said that to her? Or what would you like to see happen now? You know, and there's other things. Like I said, I've got a bunch of them listed there on your screen as well. But open-ended questions are door openers. And what they do is they absolutely will allow a person again to vent and to really be able to express themselves and what they're doing. Why is that important? Because you're trying to create this place of safety that is not silence, where that they've just checked out, and it's not violence, where that they're off the chart mad, but there is a place of safety where people feel like that they can state their path and they can learn and look and make it safe for others paths as well, and we can finally come to a place of collaboration. So that's what we're looking at with all of that. Now, this brings me then to framing. So let's say, for instance, that you're having to investigate a complaint made by one employee against another. It is because you have concerns about what you initially heard while serving as a complaint receiver that you have to contact this person and say something about the reason for the contact. And you'd like to discuss it and maybe get his or her perspective about what it is. This calls for a skill known as framing. Let me show you some of the least effective ways to start a difficult conversation when we're talking about this framing. These are the least effective ways. You could start with an insult. You are so arrogant. You know, I just absolutely cannot stand you. You could start with an accusation. You're lying. You are a liar. You could start with threats. You're going to be sorry. You are absolutely going to be sorry for what you did. You could state negative assumptions. You're trying to undermine our team. You could immediately start by making judgments or coming to certain conclusions. You don't care about anyone else but yourself. You could express negative feelings about the person. I am furious with you. But sometimes it helps to use facts rather than judgments or opinions or assumptions. I think it's better to be neutral rather than value-laden in your language. And I think sometimes goals which appear legitimate to both parties, both sides, are sometimes pretty important. Saying, listen, this is the goal of this meeting. This is what I want to try to see happen here. So just to give you some examples of this. So instead of, in terms of, for instance, dealing with specific facts, instead of saying, you are constantly undermining him, you could say, at the meeting yesterday, you told Joe he was out of touch. And I saw you roll your eyes when he began to speak. You see that? That was a specific fact. I mean, you saw this, you heard this, that's exactly what was said. And it wasn't just, where you were just accusing him or judging. Here's another one. Instead of saying, your use of email is unacceptable, which is so general, and you're giving an opinion there, and you're giving, you're making assumptions, or you're making a judgment. You could be specific, using specific facts, and say, yesterday you CC'd the email to Betty, to the entire department, and in it you called her an idiot, and you accused her of bigotry. Now there, you've started a very difficult conversation, but you started with facts, and not assumptions, not opinions, and not judgments. When you start dealing with neutral language, you could say, your opinions are off base. Now, instead of that, you could try this. I think you and Joe may have different priorities. Or instead of saying, you weren't listening when I explained your responsibilities, you could try saying, I'm not sure you and Joe have the same understanding about your responsibilities. And that could very well be true. And that then opens the door, because of the way that you have opened this and you've framed this, that now maybe this can actually be worked out. Sometimes using goals, which may appear legitimate to both parties. So instead of saying, you need to stop interrupting people when they're talking, that's just rude, you could try this. I'd like everyone to feel respected, especially when they disagree. And everybody wants to feel respected. That's a nice goal to have. Everybody can agree with that. Or instead of saying, stop trying to undermine our team, you could try to say, I'd like us to agree on what's okay and not okay as we try to complete this project by the deadline. So these are some things that when you're talking about framing, that it absolutely, if it's framed wrong, you can find yourself in a place where that you are just closing off the conversation. And so framing is very important as you start to deal with some of these very crucial and sometimes difficult conversations. Another thing to do is to use I language rather than you language, or I and you statements I've got here. This is important because you statements are often taken as judgmental, and whereas I statements are not. So let me give you some examples. I have some on the screen that you can look at, but I've got a few here as well. And here's one that I've got. This is an example of a you statement. You're just too sensitive about race. Where an example of an I statement might be, Sally, I'd really like to understand what leads you to believe that what Jane said was because of your race. Or here's another one. Now here's a you statement. You obviously don't understand the assignment. Or an example of an I statement is, I'd like to understand what both of you thought the assignment involved. You see that? And now you've opened the door to, again, a pool of shared ideas. Here's another one, a you statement. You offended me. Whereas an I statement, I feel offended. Another example of a you statement. That's not what you said a few minutes ago. Instead, you could say, I'm confused. Earlier, I thought you said you didn't hear their conversation, but now it's sounding like you did. What am I missing here? What's happening here? Again, all of this has to do with this pool of shared meaning and creating this place of safety. And this is so vitally important. I know I keep coming back to it, but the problem with so many people, the reason why the teams fall apart, the reason why, there's a saying that I read the other day, and that is that people don't leave a job. People don't quit a job. People don't leave a job. They usually leave a boss, or they quit a boss, and that happens a lot. So we want to make sure that as we're bringing people together, there's naturally going to be some friction. There's naturally going to be some difficulties in here, and we have to somehow get people into the pool of shared meaning. Okay, so we've just got a few more left. Let's talk about contrasting and contrasting skills. Contrasting is simply a pair of statements. I mean, the first one describes what you don't want, and the second one is a statement about what you do want. So if you suspect the direct report with whom you want to hold a crucial confrontation, might react defensively prior to discussing the issue, you might find it helpful to use the skill of contrasting. Or if you will, while you're attempting to hold a crucial confrontation with your direct report, and she appears to feel unsafe, maybe angry or fearful, step out of that conversation and use the skill of contrasting. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Bob, I don't want you to think I don't appreciate all the great work you've done, because I certainly do. I do want to share a concern, and it's a concern that I have about how you spoke to Beth when you disagreed with her in our staff meeting. Now see, you'll notice there that I started with how much I appreciated all of his great work, but then I contrasted that with, there was one thing that I felt like we needed to do that seemed to contrast with that. Here's another one. Jill, it isn't that I want to deny your right of free speech. That's obviously very important. I know you feel passionately about your political views, but I do want to talk with you about some concerns I have about two recent conversations I've heard about with your colleagues. And so you'll notice, I think political speech is important. I think your freedom of speech is important. But in contrast to this, it seems like we've had a couple of conversations, that might need to be addressed. It's a crucial conversation. You're getting into this crucial conversation, and it's a difficult thing. So we're talking about contrasting skills. Now, another one that we're going to deal with is describing the gap. And I like this little quote from William Shakespeare. Expectation is the root of all heartache. And I like that because I think there's a lot of truth in it, at times anyway. It's a little bit dark, but I do think that it's there. When others break promises, when people act badly, or if they violate your expectations, it's often useful to describe the gap between what was expected or agreed to and what happened or didn't happen. And doing this consists in 4 parts. And you have to make it safe to talk about this. So it takes a little bit of skill to do this. But the first thing you need to do is to start with the facts about what was agreed to or expected. That's the first thing. Start with the facts. And secondly, describe what actually happened or didn't happen. And then ask an open-ended question. What happened? Or can we talk about this? And finally, listening to the reply the other person makes in response to your question. Honestly listen. It's honestly very, very important. So, for instance, consider an ability gap. Only Joe can get permissions for me to use that software, and he was away on vacation. Okay? An attitude problem. I have a lot of other more important things to do and decided I'll get to it when I get to it. Sometimes it's both. I never felt comfortable using PeopleSoft, and to tell you the truth, I think it's a pain in the rear. It takes forever and is constantly changing. And so what you're doing is you're dealing with, this is what I expected and this is what happened, or this is not what happened. What you're doing is you are describing the gap. So here's an example. Um, we agreed that if any problems arose that might prevent us from reaching our deadlines, we would communicate with one another. Now, there you're describing the gap. This is what we said we were going to do, and this is what happened. Here's another one. Jane was expecting to get your order by noon on Wednesday. When she hadn't heard from you by the end of the day, Thursday, she told me she called you, but you didn't answer. Again, you see, the gap. And then, of course, what happened. that's a big thing. You have to deal with that. So describing the gap is another way of dealing with this crucial conversation. Then there is limit setting. This can be used to communicate what is and is not acceptable to you in your role as a leader. It allows you to establish boundaries, expectations, if you're concerned about what others are requesting or expecting from you, or if you don't like what they're doing or not doing or planning to do. The skill, though, is really intended to help avoid misunderstandings. It can help you to decline requests that you believe are inappropriate or when other considerations, might have priority. So let me give you an example of this. Here it is. Dennis, I understand you may need to say you disagree with your colleagues when you do, but it's at least as important to me that everyone feel respected and safe in the workplace. Raising your voice, name calling, or making threats is not okay. You can see there that now what's happened is I made sure that when I was dealing with this, I made sure that I was using facts. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just judging, and I made sure that I was setting those limits. I'm giving choices. This is something that, is not going to be acceptable. Here's another example. Pat, you asked me to take disciplinary action towards Carrie. And after talking with both of you and also with several people who were present when the incident occurred, I've determined that under the circumstances, her actions towards you were appropriate. And I will not be taking disciplinary action against Carrie. So it's important to see, this idea of I'm setting limits. I'm being clear, I'm speaking simply, and I'm offering a positive choice first. And I think that's important, especially when you're setting limits and you're offering choices with consequences. And by the way, it's not making threats, it's not giving ultimatums, but it's saying, listen, this is important to me, and this is not. This is not appropriate. This is not helpful, whatever the case might be. Why are we doing that? Again, it comes back to this idea of creating a place of safety where that people will bring their ideas, their paths, their perspectives, and deposit those into this pool of shared meaning. And they have to feel like that they can do that. Well, the final one that I want to talk about is consequences. And I think that's adorable. But using consequences means telling the other person what you'll do if his or her behavior does not change. And by the way, just a little note here. Now that's different from actually imposing a consequence after someone has failed to change his or her behavior. To do this, you have to identify an action the other person would not want you to take and tell this person that you'll take this action if the behavior doesn't change. It always contains an if or then clause. So let me give you an example. Chris, I don't want to date you. If you continue to ask me out, I'm going to speak to the chair about this. Maybe this is, for instance, a chair to a staff member. William, we've discussed this before. Spreading rumors about your colleagues is hurtful to them, disruptive to the work environment, and unacceptable to me. If this happens again, see, notice that. If this happens again, I will give you a written corrective action. So, and there's different times and places that you would use this, but I would say honestly that the idea of consequences should probably be a last resort and should certainly not be your first resort. I think it's a weak leader that has to start off with this, but I do think that there are times when it's absolutely necessary. Well, I hope this has been a help to you, and hopefully you can take this now, and as you're dealing with your teams and working out some of the conflicts and that sort of thing, that you'll take a little better approach to this with these crucial conversations. Hey, make sure you do your reading. I look forward to spending some time with you in discussion and just spending time with you this week. God bless you is my prayer.